That's a real warning about real entities operating in the realm of water. And Jesus knew it. That's why he walked on water, not because he wanted to put on a miraculous show to impress his disciples. He walked on water because he was standing on the domain of those forces. He was declaring authority over that realm. This is documented in Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22-33. When the disciples see him walking on the lake and are terrified, thinking he's a ghost, Jesus calmly tells them, "Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid." That calm wasn't ignorance, it was complete authority. It was the king standing on enemy territory, telling them to their face, "This also belongs to me." That's what I need you to understand before we continue. Tell me where you're watching from. Write your country, your city if you want, in the comments because this testimony is reaching many places, and I want to know how far this word is reaching. I've received messages from people in Mexico, in Colombia, in Peru, in the Dominican Republic, in Spain, in the United States, in Africa, and in all those places there are people with similar experiences, with dreams of water, with patterns of destruction in their families that they don't understand where they come from. I need you to know that you are not alone. And what I'm going to reveal now can give you the name of what you've been facing without knowing it. There's something most people don't know about the underwater realm, and that is that it doesn't operate chaotically. It's not a collection of disorganized forces floating aimlessly underwater. What I saw in that dream that God gave me had structure, it had order, it had hierarchy. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous, because when the enemy is organized and you don't know it, you don't know what to fight against, you don't know where the attack is coming from, you don't know why your life keeps falling into the same holes over and over again, no matter how hard you try. The place I saw didn't resemble what people imagine when they think of the bottom of the sea. There was no seaweed floating around or fish swimming around. It was a physical space, like a building, like a luxury resort. The floors were shiny, gleaming, the kind you see in a five-star hotel or one of those casinos they show in Vegas movies. The walls were like carved rock, like a cave, but not in the dark and abandoned sense, but in the sense that someone had taken that space and turned it into something impressive. Everything there had a level of elegance that I didn't expect to find in a place like that. And that was the first thing that disturbed me. Because when you think of the kingdom of darkness, you think of something dirty, something decayed, something that clearly looks evil. But what I saw looked good, it looked attractive, and that wasn't an accident. The enemy doesn't present himself as ugly. That's in the Bible. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 14, it says that Satan himself disguises himself as an angel of light. If the leader disguises himself, his agents also disguise themselves, and the place where they operate is also disguised. They make it beautiful so that whoever enters won't be fooled. They feel like they're in danger, so that whoever enters feels like they're in an exclusive place, a place of privilege, a place few have access to. That feeling of exclusivity is part of the hook. I saw glass display cases like those in a high-end jewelry store. Not one, several. And in those display cases there weren't jewels, there were people exhibited like luxury goods waiting to be shipped. The woman I described at the beginning, the one in the bright red dress, the long red hair, the red heels, the frozen smile. She was one of those pieces on display, and she wasn't the only one. There were other figures, other creatures, some humanoid, others I can't describe precisely because I don't have words for how they were, but they were there in their respective glass spaces, arranged, available, ready to be assigned. Stop for a second and think about it. If you saw that in a science fiction movie, you'd say it's a good idea for a story. But I saw it in a God-given dream, and the guide who was with me explained what it was. These entities are sent to Earth with specific missions. They don't arrive here randomly. They have objectives, they have targets, they have strategies designed for that particular target. And some of those missions are directed toward people who don't even have any idea they're a target. The man in charge of that place had exactly that role. He was the one who approved or rejected the missions. He was the one who decided which entity went, to whom, and for what purpose. I saw him sitting at a small round table, like the ones in a bar, talking to a couple, smiling, completely relaxed, with the attitude of someone who's been doing the same thing for many years and is good at it. There was no rush on his part, no agitation. Everything in that place had a calmness that, in retrospective view, was more terrifying than any chaos, from a system that has been operating for a very long time and that very few people have seen from the inside. And that system has entry points into the physical world. That's something I need to tell you clearly. You don't get trapped in the marine realm by accident. There are doors, there are practices that open those doors. Some are deliberate, like certain rituals performed near the water, offerings to the sea, pacts made on someone's behalf without their knowledge. And this is where I want you to focus your attention, because this affects more families than you might imagine. Generational pacts. Someone in your family line, your grandmother, your great-grandfather, some ancestor you never knew may have made a deal with the forces of the sea, a deal in exchange for prosperity, protection, children, whatever it was. And that deal has consequences that are passed down from generation to generation until someone breaks it. I've known families where the patterns of destruction are so consistent that they can't be explained by psychology or sociology alone. Marriages that always break up in the same way. Men from the same family who always end up alone. Women who always attract the same kind of destructive relationship. Diseases that recur in the same part of the body across generations. These aren't always genetic or cultural patterns. Sometimes they're spiritual chains that no one has broken because no one knew they were there. There's another gateway that few talk about, the supernatural attraction to water. I'm not talking about liking the beach or enjoying swimming. I'm referring to an obsession that goes beyond the rational. People who feel the sea calling to them, who can't stay away from the water for long periods without feeling unwell, who have an emotional connection to the sea that describes more of a relationship than a landscape. That, in my experience and what God has shown me, can be a sign that there's an established spiritual bond, either through themselves or someone in their family line. And then there are the dreams. Water dreams are one of the first indicators I recognize when someone tells me about their situation. Dreaming that you're walking on the seabed, dreaming that you're living underwater, dreaming that people are calling to you from inside the sea. Dreaming of rivers that sweep you away, of currents that pull you under. That's not always the brain processing the day. Sometimes it's an active spiritual gateway. Sometimes it's a real connection operating while you sleep, and it has effects on your waking life that you don't recognize because no one taught you how. I saw people of all nationalities, all ages, all skin colors in that place. An elderly couple, around 70 or 80 years old, walking hand in hand, wearing matching clothes in shades of blue-green, with gray hair, as if they were going to a sports club. But their faces, their eyes, the way they moved, everything said they weren't in control of themselves. They moved as if someone else were controlling their bodies from the inside, like well-dressed puppets. And I saw them pass by me without noticing, and I felt something that wasn't exactly fear, it was a deep sadness because they were real people who at some point had had a life, a family, their own decisions, and now they were there. Wait, because what comes next touches on something you've probably already seen in your own life without knowing it had a name. The agents of the marine kingdom only operate underwater. That's the part that shook me the most when the guide explained it to me. The man I saw, the one in charge of that place, his main function wasn't to manage what was inside. His main function was to send agents into the world of the living. And those agents can take different forms. They can appear as people, as animals, as situations, as opportunities that seem good, but that have an invisible hook that slowly pulls you into their territory. There are people walking in this world who are agents of the marine kingdom and don't know it. They were sent on a mission, and that mission operates through them without them being fully aware of what they are doing. Others do know. Others have made pacts willingly and consciously, but most, I tell you from experience, most are unwitting instruments. And that doesn't make them any less dangerous. In fact, it makes them more dangerous because they have no visible guilt, because they appear to be victims as well. And that lowers your guard in ways that an obvious enemy couldn't. The Apostle Peter wrote it in a way that always resonates with me. In 1 Peter, chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." That verse is always taught in a general way. But when you've seen what I saw, when you know that this adversary has an organized kingdom underwater, with employees and assigned territories and missions, that verse takes on a completely different dimension. It's not just a warning to beware of sin. It's a description of an active, structured, patient, and very well-organized operating system. And what disturbed me most about everything I saw in that place wasn't the darkness or the strangeness, it was how normal everything seemed. People eating, conversing, walking around, in a clean, elegant, orderly place. If I hadn't had that guide by my side explaining what everything was, I could have mistaken that place for any luxurious space on earth. And that's exactly the trap. When the enemy catches you, it's not always with terror, sometimes it's with comfort, with a glass of wine, background music, gleaming floors, and the feeling that you're in a special place. Like this right now, so this information reaches more people, because there are entire families who need to hear this, and they won't find it anywhere else. The first layer of what I'm revealing to you today is this: the underwater kingdom is real. It has a physical and hierarchical structure. It has a system for sending agents to Earth and has gateways that operate through generational pacts, recurring dreams, supernatural attractions to water, and ritual practices performed near or in water, because what operates on the surface of this realm has a deeper level beneath, which is where the real decisions are made, where the strongest chains are forged, where the operations that have been silently destroying families for decades are taking place. And that's precisely what we're going to see in the next level. There's something that no one who talks about sea spirits tells you. And that is that the greatest damage this realm does doesn't happen to people who openly practice witchcraft, it happens to people who go to church, people who pray, people who have a Bible in their home and who have believed for years that they are spiritually well, but who carry chains they can't see because they were never taught to identify them. That outrages me. It outrages me deeply, because ignorance on this subject is not innocent. Ignorance has real consequences in real lives, and I've seen it too many times to remain silent. When God showed me that place, I didn't understand everything immediately. There were things I saw that only months later, through prayer and studying the Word, did I begin to fully understand. One of those things was the area I saw that looked like a restaurant. Round tables, people sitting and talking, laughing, having drinks with a completely relaxed attitude. That contrast initially confused me because in the first part of the place I saw, there were people in glass cases, there was that woman with the frozen smile, there was that elderly couple walking like zombies. But in this other area, everything looked calm, normal, pleasant. And it was there that I understood something that was difficult for me to process, that there are levels of imprisonment in that realm. Not everyone there is equally aware of their situation. Some are completely lost, completely taken, without free will, like that elderly couple I saw. But others are in a transitional zone, in a state where there is still some of their will present, but they are being worked on, they are being processed, they are in the process of total surrender. And that process can last for years, it can span an entire human life, and from the outside that person seems perfectly normal. That's what happens behind the scenes, and I need you to understand it because it may be happening to someone you know right now. The process that the Marine Kingdom uses to capture a soul is not instantaneous in most cases. It is gradual, it is patient, it starts with something small, with a small door, and it gradually opens up space, year after year, generation after generation. I knew of a woman, I'll call her that to protect her identity, who came to me completely broken. Her marriage had ended. She had 3 children, and all 3 had different but equally serious problems. One struggled with addiction, another was trapped in a series of abusive relationships she couldn't escape, and the third had an illness doctors couldn't clearly explain. And amidst all of this, she had recurring dreams about water. She dreamt she lived at sea, that she had a second family down there, that a man in that place told her she belonged to him. When we began to delve into her history, we discovered that her grandmother had performed rituals near the river in her hometown. Specific rituals to ask for fertility, for protection for her children, for financial prosperity. In these rituals, offerings were made, gifts were left in the water, and words were spoken that, within the spiritual context, constituted a pact. The grandmother didn't know exactly what she was doing. She was following a tradition she had been taught. But in the spiritual world, intention isn't always the only thing that matters. Action matters too. And that action opened a door on that family line that remained open for decades. The daughter of that grandmother, the mother of this woman who came to me, had similar problems, although less intense. An unstable marriage, a chronic feeling that something was always missing, disturbing dreams that she never told anyone about, because in her family those things weren't discussed. And when it reached the granddaughter, the intensity had multiplied, because each generation that passes without breaking that pact is a generation more bound. It's like a debt that accrues interest. Every year that passes, without anyone confronting it, it grows. That's what's happening in many Latin American families, and it's not talked about because there's a very dangerous cultural mix that was normalized centuries ago. The mixture of superficial Catholicism with indigenous or African practices that involve rituals with water, with rivers, with the sea, with water entities to whom favors are requested in exchange for something. That's not harmless folklore. Those are real spiritual gateways that have real consequences for the generations that come after. And I'm not just talking about Latin America. I saw music from all over the world: Eurasian, African, European. The Marine Kingdom has geographical borders, it has spiritual borders, and those borders are marked by the pacts, the practices, and the gateways that each person or family it has opened up over time. Let me tell you something that left me speechless when I fully understood it. The visible consequences of a connection with the marine realm always seem spiritual, sometimes they seem medical, sometimes they seem psychological, sometimes they seem simply bad luck. And that's why people go to the doctor, the psychologist, the marriage counselor, the bank to refinance their debt without ever addressing the root of the problem. I'm not saying that medicine or psychology are worthless. I'm saying that when the root is spiritual, no solution that ignores that root will be permanent. You can treat the symptom your whole life without anything fundamentally changing. What are those visible consequences? The ones I've seen most frequently are these. First, systematic marital destruction. Not a divorce due to incompatibility. A pattern where every significant romantic relationship ends the same way, with betrayal, with abandonment, with violence, with a feeling that something invisible sabotaged what was going well. Second, chronic financial problems. Not a lack of skill or work, but money comes and goes without a reasonable explanation. Businesses that start off with everything going for them and suddenly collapse. Opportunities that open up and then close at the last minute. Third, unexplained or treatment-resistant illnesses, especially those involving the reproductive system, kidneys, lungs, anything related to bodily fluids. Fourth, and this is something very few mention, an inability to maintain healthy spiritual relationships. People who try to grow in their faith, but there's always something that distracts them, that pulls them away, that keeps them in a state of permanent lukewarmness, unable to move forward. That last point seems to me the most damaging of all because it directly attacks the only tool that can liberate that person. I saw in that place how the behind the scenes of the missions that man sent out worked. The guidance God gave me explained that each agent who leaves that place has a specific profile of the target they are going to. He knows things about that person, he knows their weaknesses, he knows their wounds, He knows what kind of relationship or situation will lower their guard, and he comes with exactly that. He comes as the perfect person for that wound. He comes as the exact opportunity that person has been waiting for. And when he enters that person's life, he doesn't come causing immediate harm, he comes giving, he comes offering, he comes doing exactly what that person needed. And in that process of giving, of offering, of appearing as the answer to a need, he opens access, he establishes a bond. He plants something that will later grow and claim what it came for. In Ezekiel chapter 29, verses 3 through 5, God speaks directly about the great dragon that lies in the midst of his rivers. He confronts it, he calls it what it is, a spirit of power that has established itself in the waters and claims ownership over everything around it. That is not a decorative passage in the Bible. It's a record that God knows that realm, knows where it operates, knows how it operates, and has already declared it defeated. But the defeat declared in heaven has to be applied on earth, and to apply it, you first have to know that the problem exists. The victims who have affected me most in all of this are the children. And I say this with a weight on my chest that I don't know how to describe well, because there are children who are born into a family line tied to the marine realm, and from a young age, they show signs that their parents interpret as behavioral problems, as traumas, as medical conditions. Children who have constant nightmares about water from the age of 3 or 4. Children who have irrational fears of water or, exactly the opposite, a dangerous attraction to it that puts them at physical risk. Children who, from a very young age, seem to have a dual nature, as if there was something more inside them than what should be there. And their parents, lacking the spiritual tools to understand what they're seeing, take them to specialists, medicate them, subject them to therapies that treat what can be seen, but don't address what's truly causing it all. I'm not sharing this to create panic. I'm sharing it because information is the primary tool. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't find the right solution. And there's something else, music, operating behind the scenes that needs to be clearly stated, even if it's uncomfortable. There's music, there's entertainment, there are films, there's an entire cultural industry that has connections to the marine realm. Which are not accidental. When I was a child I saw Splash, The Little Mermaid, Atlantis, and I processed them as pure imagination. But when God showed me that place and I saw the elegance of that space, I saw the creatures in the glass cases, I saw the sophistication of that system, I understood that those movies didn't come out of nowhere. Someone had access to that information. Someone who had a connection to that realm, who knew what it looks like, how it works, what kind of creatures are there. And he presented it as entertainment so that when someone like me came along to talk about this, the immediate reaction would be, that's like The Little Mermaid. It's fiction. No, it's not fiction, it's a normalization operation. Making you see reality as fantasy so that when you realize it, you lack the tools to recognize it. And that's part of the goals of the Marine Kingdom that we're going to look at now at its deepest level. Because what I just told you is only the surface of an operation that has been running for centuries with a precision that can only be understood when you see the origin of where it comes from. What's coming up now requires you to be seated, because we're going to get to the core of all this. Before I tell you what really controls all of this, I need you to understand something that God has been revealing to me progressively. Not all at once, but in layers, as if he himself knew that there is information that human beings need to receive at the right time so they don't break under the weight of what it means. Because what I'm going to tell you now, this is not speculation. It is not vague religious interpretation, it is what the Word of God documents, what I saw, and what is confirmed in the testimonies of people who have come out of that realm from within. People who are directly involved and whom God rescued so they could tell what they experienced. The marine realm is independent. That is the first thing you need to know. It is not an autonomous system that operates on its own without connection to the rest of the dark spiritual world. It is a branch, a department within a much larger spiritual power structure, and that structure has a head. In Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 9, the war in heaven is described. the fall of Satan and his angels who were cast down to earth. That is not poetic metaphor, that is spiritual history. And part of that casting down included the establishment of spiritual realms on earth, in the air, in the waters, in specific places in the physical world, where those fallen entities established territories of operation. The marine realm is one of those territories, and the one who controls it at its highest level is not the short man I saw in that dream. That man was a zone administrator, a branch manager. The entity that truly controls the waters in the spiritual world is what the Bible calls Leviathan. And Leviathan is not an extinct sea creature, it is a spiritual entity of exceptional power that operates from the depths of the waters and whose influence extends to the earth in ways that most believers have never considered. In Job chapter 41, from verse 1 to verse 34, God devotes an entire chapter, not a verse, not a paragraph, but a whole chapter to describing Leviathan, and he describes it as something that no human being can subdue by their own strength. He says that blazing torches come out of its mouth, that its breath kindles coals, and flames come out of its mouth. He says that it makes the sea boil like a pot. He says that it is king over all the arrogant. That last part is important. King over all the arrogant. The spirit of arrogance, of pride, of self-sufficiency. From the mentality that says, I don't need God, I can manage on my own. That operates under the covering of Leviathan. That's why many people who have ties to the marine realm also have a deep resistance to spiritual authority. It's not just character, it's an active influence. And Leviathan has a secondary operation that is just as destructive as the first. If its primary function is to ensnare souls and destroy lives, its secondary function is specifically to obstruct worship and communion with God. I understood this when I read Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, where it says that the Lord will punish Leviathan, the swift serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and will slay the dragon of the sea, the swift serpent and the twisting serpent, two aspects of the same spirit. The swift one attacks quickly, striking when you least expect it, and the twisting one works slowly, in a convoluted, entangled way, weaving a net so gradually that before you know it, you're already caught without knowing how you got there. People who have this spirit operating on them or their family line have a characteristic mark on their spiritual life. They may hear powerful sermons and feel something in the moment, but the next day it's as if nothing penetrated. They may make genuine decisions of faith, but something always interrupts the process before it solidifies. They may have real encounters with God, but there's like an invisible membrane that prevents that experience from taking root and producing permanent transformation. That's not just a lack of faith, that's an active obstruction. It's Leviathan doing exactly what it was designed to do, prevent the soul from reaching complete freedom in Christ. Now I need to tell you what the hidden purposes of the marine kingdom are, because when you see them, you're going to start recognizing things in your own life or in the lives of people you know that were previously nameless. The first purpose is the theft of spiritual identity, not the theft of documents, but the theft of who you are in God. When a person has ties to the marine kingdom, there is a deep confusion about their identity, their purpose, their worth. There is a constant voice saying they are not enough, that they don't deserve good things, that they are damaged, that God can't use them. That voice isn't conscience, it isn't just low self-esteem, it's a deliberate operation to keep that person from understanding who they are in Christ. Because if they understand, if they truly receive Him, the chains are broken, and the kingdom loses one of its captives. The second purpose is the contamination of the family line. I have seen this so many times that I recognize the pattern from the first conversation. A family where the firstborn always have specific problems. A family where the women are always abandoned. A family where the men always fall into addiction. A family where no one reaches old age without a devastating illness. These aren't always genetic or cultural patterns. Sometimes they are marks of a spiritual territory that has established itself over that family line and claims from each generation what it considers its rightful covenant right. The third purpose, and this is the one that disturbed me most when I understood it, is the infiltration of the body of Christ. In the church, in congregations, there are agents of the marine kingdom who are sent specifically to faith communities, not to destroy them from the outside, which also happens, but to destroy them from within. They come with apparent gifts, they come with charisma, they come with a story of testimony that moves everyone. They settle into positions of influence, in leadership, in worship ministries, in prayer groups, and from there they operate, not always consciously. I repeat what I said before, some don't know they are instruments, but the damage is the same. Divisions that have no human logic, offenses that are magnified until they destroy relationships that took years to build, leaders who fall into scandals just when their ministry was growing. That's not always just human weakness. Sometimes there's a spiritual operation behind it that was designed for that specific result. Verse 1 says, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons." Deceitful spirits, not obvious spirits, not spirits that come with the face of a spirit, spirits that deceive, that seem like something else, that present themselves with an acceptable face, even spiritual, even seemingly anointed. I saw that in that place, it makes you lower your guard. If that place had looked dark and terrifying, I would have run. But it looked impressive, and that's exactly the strategy. Now let me tell you about the evidence that confirms this isn't an isolated personal experience. Throughout history, there are records in multiple cultures of aquatic entities that demand worship and require tributes. In West Africa, Momiuata, a water deity represented as a woman with a fish tail, has an active devotion that involves rituals, offerings, and pacts. In the Caribbean and Brazil, Yemanja, Queen of the Sea, has millions of followers who make offerings to her in the water on specific dates. In the indigenous cultures of the Americas, there are water entities that are named differently in each region but have the same nature. They demand something in return for what they give. In Greek mythology, there are the Sirens, Poseidon, the Nereids, that whole system of aquatic deities claiming power over the sea and those who cross it. Cultures that didn't know each other, yes, on different continents, with different languages, with different histories describing the same kinds of entities, the same kinds of demands, the same kinds of rituals near the water. That's not cultural coincidence, that's the same spiritual reality being perceived from different angles around the world. I didn't invent it. The Bible didn't invent it. God showed it to me because it already existed. And there's something else I want you to see before we move on to the part you most need to hear today. The marine realm has a specific agenda regarding human sexuality. I say this directly because it's part of what I saw, and it's part of what confirms the experiences of people who have broken free from ties with that realm. The man I saw in that place was touching a woman in a sexualized way. It wasn't something I interpreted, it's what I saw. And the guide explained to me that there are entities from the marine realm that operate specifically through the sexual sphere, establishing bonds through intimate relationships, creating ties that go beyond the emotional and delve into the spiritual in ways that few people understand. In 1 Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 16, it says, "Or do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute becomes one body with her? For, as it is written, the two will become one flesh." That union is not only physical, it is spiritual. And when that union occurs with someone who has ties to the marine realm, that person transfers something, not always consciously. But in the spiritual world, intimate contact opens doors that are then very difficult to close without direct spiritual intervention. There are people who came to me after relationships they couldn't understand, relationships with people who seemed perfect at first, who treated them exceptionally well, who were everything they'd ever wanted. But after that relationship, whether it ended or continued, their lives began to decline in specific areas. Their faith grew cold, their prosperity stalled, their health began to show problems, their relationship with God became distant, and they attributed all of that to their